I found something else I've been doing wrong that was in the special rules that I missed. Um, Initially, I had two of the battalion guns up here with their respective attached regiments back here, and realized in the special rules that those Hessian battalion guns cannot be unlimbered unless they're stacked with their respective infantry unit. So what I ended up with, and part of the problem was trying to unwind this, was that I had those battalion guns had taken some casualties already. Now the fact that they couldn't have been stacked alone meant that I had to readjust. Rather than moving the guns away, I decided, well, I wanted to have the guns up here, so I just moved the infantry units up there with the guns, stacked the guns on top, and then one of the rules you have for the battalion guns is anytime the stack that they're in, which would be the battalion guns and their respective attached infantry unit, anytime they take a hit, you can choose not to apply the hit to the artillery unit and instead apply it to the infantry unit. So those battalion guns had taken, I think, 2 hits, and so the other thing obviously is that you can't really stack them together because you'd have to stack both of those big 11-point, or I think maybe the other one was a 9-point unit. You'd have to stack those together and the guns, which I think, if you're on the line, would actually violate stacking. Well, maybe not for clear. I think you can have up to 32 strength points in a line stacked in a clear hex. At least that's what it looks like on the terrain chart here, where you can see the number in parentheses is the number of strength points that you can actually stack in a particular hex. In a clear hex, it looks like 32. So maybe they could have all been stacked together. Regardless, they couldn't stay there because the shots coming from this battery here under Brigadier General Knox, just 6 hexes away, was absolutely nailing those guys. So I didn't want my infantry units to get wrecked. As you can see already, this is the unit here. I've moved them back. They're shaken already. So, and I think, is this, yeah. I think the infantry ended up taking 2 hits because I didn't want to damage the battalion guns. So what I ended up doing was moving them out of there and having them run back towards the relative safety of the terrain back here, so that Knox's artillery battery can now instead focus on trying to hit this guy, who's the only one I think he actually has a line of sight to. These woods here are blocking this battery, and this battery would be partially obscured, but here you've got a pretty direct line of sight at a range of 7 hexes. For an American artillery battery is times 2, so you're looking at 8 points of damage. What he had here was 6, and at 6 hexes it's times 5, so that's, suddenly it goes from being 8 points to 20 points, and instead of a 8 to 10 ratio, which is going to fall into that 1 to 1.5 column, you end up with just a difference of 1 hex. Suddenly you go from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 1, 20 strength points to 10 defensive value of this hex. So you can see why these guys were taking hits here, so I had to move them. It's just unsustainable against that stronger artillery. Now I can get a pretty decent collection of points here. These guys, to shoot it at Knox here, these guys have a partially obscured, actually my bad, these guys have a totally obscured. I'm thinking of shooting at this battery back here, whereas here this would be totally obscured. This hex would be totally obscured by the woods here. Here they can actually fire out at this guy with a partial, you're drawing the line of sight directly along the hex spine here, and if you have a partial, one side of a LOS blocked and the other clear, then you just cut their strength points in half. So, and then same for these guys. They're partially obscured by the guys in front of them firing along that hex spine to this guy out here. This guy can get a full shot, although he's already lost a strength point too from Knox's battery here. So we'll have to see how long he can hang out in this hex. But I can get about 14 points worth onto this hex here. The problem with shooting at the artillery here is that these guys are behind an entrenchment, which is reducing that strength, firing strength here to 0.75. So, but you know, they pretty much have to shoot at the artillery. All this infantry over here is run out of the way, specifically to get out of that dangerous artillery bombardment that the British were dropping on them initially. So something that I had to fix, not the first thing in this particular game that I've had to sort of unwind. So I ended up keeping all the losses that were inflicted. I just transferred it from the artillery onto the infantry, which is what would have happened. You know, I would have had plenty of time to have moved that infantry up there and get it arranged with the battalion guns. So what I did was just I split the infantry up and made sure it was all stacked with their respective battalion guns. So I moved some of the Hessian infantry over here so that these guns could keep this position here where they've been firing on this battery up here above the little village. So just another example of fixing things, and it's not, you know, none of this stuff is game breaking or even that frustrating. It's just, it's funny that I keep finding things like this in the special rules, and that's really my only complaint about the rules, which I think otherwise are fine. The series rules are fine. I've had no issues understanding anything or finding anything, or particularly retaining things. I'm actually remembering, you know, a lot of these modifiers and things. A lot of the terrain differences and things, you know, the specific movement values for particular formations in a particular terrain, all that stuff I'm actually retaining very well, which is unusual for me. I usually have to, you know, I can never remember any of this stuff. It just floats in and out of my head, and I have to constantly look up charts and stuff, whereas in this, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on it. I'm really remembering, oh yeah, if I want to go from a one hex line to a march column, to a one hex march column, facing, you know, to the right rear of the direction the line is facing, you know, I can remember that, hey, that only takes 2 points for Americans to do a, you know, an about face to the right, but if I want to do an about face to the left, that takes all their movement. So it's just, you know, stuff like that I would usually not remember very well, but I've been doing so here. So in that regard, the rules, the series rules in particular, are very good. These game-specific rules for Brandywine, and that's the rules here in the battle rules book, I guess is what they call it. That's where I'm not remembering stuff as well, just because it feels spread out so much. Okay, you've got standard rules, modifications, and so just remembering what's in each of these sections. You know, it's clear that they've split them up into different areas. So you've got your standard rules, modifications. There's multiple pages of that. Then you have the special rules for Brandywine and Germantown, like general special rules, I guess, specifically for these battles. You know, this is like how the American Revolution rules are modified from the series rules. Then you've got how the you know, all the special rules for this particular battle. So these would be things that aren't modifications to existing rules, but new rules in and of themselves just for these battles. Then you've got specific to Brandywine special rules for Americans. Okay, got several pages of that. Then you've got special rules just for the British for Brandywine. Then special rules for everything. And then you've got special rules by scenario. But your scenario will have its own special rules, but will frequently refer back to earlier scenarios, saying, oh, use the rules from that scenario. Like here, if you look for scenario 4, which is what I'm playing, Rapid March, as for scenario 1. So you got to go back to scenario 1 and look at that rule. And then, then it has a special little twist. However, this applies only to those British units which also appear in Scenario 1. So, here, Nash's command of victory points as per Scenario 3. Blocking Chad's or Chad's Ferry or Chad's Ford as per Scenario 2. So you got to go back and look. Not only do you have to read the rules for your own scenario, you got to go back and pretty much read them for all the other scenarios too, just to understand all the individual things. So I keep finding things in all these different sections. Like, I think I've got it all. Like, oh, I read everything for Brandywine. Oh, well, whoops, I missed something under the American command rules that were back under not the special rules for both Brandywine and Germantown, but the specific American special rules. And so there's just stuff, there's like 3 different places here that have rules on the entrenched hex sides. So that's where the only frustration I've had, and I barely call it frustration because I pretty much just roll with this stuff when I find it. I don't get mud panties in a bunch just because I'm 15 turns in and I missed some little tweak to the entrenchment rules or something. None of that stuff really wrecks the game for me. Particularly because all the rules that I've found that I was missing have not had some huge effect on gameplay. I haven't been making checks or calculating strength points or evaluating the strength of units as I've been playing. I haven't been doing those things wrong. Evaluating strength or getting fire combat values wrong. I haven't done stuff that could have really affected particular results one way or another. Everything that's happened has either been fairly easy to unwind, or I've been able to pretty simply and quickly allocate or make a change for it pretty easily. So overall, it has not been a detriment, I think, but it is one of those things where it's fun. I have to laugh every time I look through some element of the special rules where I'll find some new paragraph like, oh, great, this is something that I completely missed the first time I read through, even though I probably read it and it just didn't, I was paying attention to some other rule or exception or something and then missed that one particular rule. So it's just been funny how that's worked out. All right, finally up to the 4 o'clock turn, and this is when Howe's column is going to start appearing up at the north end of the map. So far, I've got Sullivan's wing, or Sullivan's division, and Alexander's division, except for Nash's brigade, up there on Birmingham Hill. And I'll just move the camera so you can see this position where it's currently set up. So we've got Birmingham Hill here, and they're essentially just along the crest of the hill, all the way across this sort of little valley here and over to the Birmingham Meeting House, where initially I didn't have them. You can see where Sullivan, actually it's not Sullivan, Sullivan's there, but the commander of the 1st Maryland Brigade here is with a unit in the graveyard there near Birmingham Meeting House. Initially I thought because units in the graveyard have to be in general order, that would be a bad place to actually have troops, but as it turns out they have all kinds of special fire bonuses and things for being in that graveyard behind that wall. So I ended up making that kind of a key point of that position, and then the rest of the line pretty much strings out along here. Couldn't quite make it all the way to the end of Birmingham Hill, and I'm not sure exactly how the British troops are going to be arranging themselves at the top of the map here. But I know that they'll be coming on basically between this road here and the Birmingham Road over there. So I'll have to see once I get them on there and start to organize them. The interesting thing is that it's 4 o'clock, and so there's not exactly a lot of time left before it gets dark. I think that's 7 turns until dusk at least. And, they've got, not only do the British troops have to get on the board and start to form up, but then they have kind of a long ways to, or a lot of ground that they need to cover before they even reach Birmingham Hill. In the historical battle, the Brits just kind of got to Birmingham Hill quickly, blew through it. De Boer's Maryland Brigade collapsed, and that just rolled up the whole line from the left over. And so that just all kind of disintegrated. The American troops all go running back down, I think this road here, where they start to form patchwork defense and meet up with the rest of the American troops. And the Brits are running, there's guys that are running down along the creek, where they end up joining up with Kniphausen's column over here to push the Americans off the board the rest of the way. So, but it's just, given how difficult it is to move great distances unless you're in road column, which we've already learned in this particular game is inherently dangerous for the British to do. If you're not in road column, you're in march column using the terrain. You're not using the road to nullify the other terrain in the hex. So it's going to be a long, slow crawl down this map. And the thought of the Brits getting from the north edge of the map, fighting a major battle there with the Americans, and then getting all the way down here. I think, they got here to this point where these guns were located and joined up with Kniphausen there. Imagine them doing all of that by nightfall, which is essentially 7 turns. I think then there's 2 turns of dusk. So 9 turns. Doing all that in 9 turns seems impossible to me. Now, if I were just moving them in 9 turns, yeah, sure. But no, they have to not only attack this American force here, they have to decisively defeat it and get it to retreat on the run all the way back here. Now, given the fact that Maxwell's 3 units of Maxwell's Light Brigade managed to almost annihilate an entire British brigade, leads me to believe that the Brits are just going to get stopped cold up here at Birmingham Hill. And I suspect that's what's going to happen. I'll be curious to see if that's what happens. Now here, I won't have entrenchments helping me on Birmingham Hill, so maybe a bayonet charge, which is what the British largely relied on in the historical battle, which I'm actually am basically through the battle itself in the book that I'm reading, Thomas J. Maguire's Philadelphia Campaign. I'm actually through the Brandywine battle now, and historically, the Brits took galling fire, particularly from this position over here on the right, where they had a large battery of guns arranged on. I don't have a concentrated battery up there, but the Brits took a lot of fire, just getting to and sort of hid at the base of Birmingham Hill until the British Guard troops on the right, the British right, managed to start rolling up the American flank. So, that charge up the hill that started to roll up that flank proved more effective than just trying to shoot it out with the Americans. And so I have not tried close combat in this with the British. It was a suicide mission down here against the entrenchments for Maxwell's Light Brigade. So this time I may be a little less leery, especially if I need to move quickly, of just charging the position up here in Birmingham Hill. And these are pretty small. A lot of these are smaller units. I want to focus on some of these smaller strength units, the 2s and the 4s, and maybe try and avoid the bigger 6 strength units that might be out there. And I think particularly on Birmingham Meeting House, the units are fairly small. So I may just want to have to focus on trying to work out, or I can try a big flanking movement and try and get around the hill here. Now this is artillery out on the end of the hill. I didn't have quite enough to extend the line. I may have to create some gaps, I don't know. But this felt to me a better position for this artillery to have a command of the approach of the hill from the tavern there. So we'll see. But the Brits, at long last, are finally going to start coming onto the board, and we'll have the classic battle at Birmingham Hill, which was Really one of the bloodier parts of the Brandywine battle. Now down here, I'm actually moving Kniphausen's men around a little bit now, knowing that the British, that Howe's column is coming, was going to try and create more of a distraction. Also, you can see there's fewer artillery units here. I lost one. The Hessian field artillery has been completely eliminated by the American artillery. Again, just rolling lights out with the Americans. Same thing over here. A couple more rolls up in the 90s from this field artillery hitting the Hessian battalion guns down here, which, again, doesn't actually hit the battalion guns. It ends up damaging the infantry underneath. So these big Hessian units, I think, have each taken about 2 losses sitting there. And so now all the guns are limbered, and these brigades or these regiments are formed up, and they're going to cross the creek here, which is, there's no ford. The ford's been blocked, so they'll go into general order to make their way across the creek and then have to reform out of that on the other side. But they're going to try and force that crossing and get up to that gun emplacement up there. Over here, these guns are staying here just to keep fire coming at the Americans. It's largely ineffectual because their strength points are halved because of blocking. The artillery here is blocking this artillery behind, and then this artillery here is half blocked by these trees. So that is, they're staying there to put some kind of fire down to hopefully keep these guys a little bit leery about moving out in the open, while I tried to effect a crossing with the 1st and 2nd brigades, which you can see the 2nd brigade's already crossed. Now down here, this is Maxwell, no, Armstrong. Armstrong's militia down here. Originally, they were formed up on these hills, and then I formed them up on this road to move them back this way to try and join up with the rest of the units. And so I decided, when I did that, I thought, well, why wouldn't Grant try and cross his brigade down here then at Gibson's Ford if the militia are abandoning this position? So when I started moving guys down here towards the creek, I did an about face with the militia and moved back around to try and engage. So if the militia can actually successfully engage this British brigade here, and I'm not sure how successful that's going to be. I think they're outgunned and probably close combated against British. These are British line troops against militia, county militia. But if I can get those guys engaged, it may not be too big of a stretch to move up Green's entire division here and just hit these guys from 2 sides. So, and there's one of the battalions of the 71st there, which is really big. But otherwise, I've got the 1st Brigade, which has about 6 strength points total between all 4 regiments, because this was the one that got decimated in the fighting against Maxwell's Light Brigade. So these guys might actually end up being in a bad spot down here if I can hit them from 2 sides. But with the British, I wanted to start forcing that crossing and not just let these guys say, oh, if things start going bad up on Birmingham Hill, I can siphon off one of these entire divisions to run up there and help. I felt like I should do something to push the issue with Kniphausen down here. Now, it could end up leading to the destruction of Kniphausen's entire wing, which would pretty much seal a loss for the British just in terms of strength points. But if they can inflict enough damage on the Americans, it might be worth it. The problem is the British are in such a hole on strength point losses already that I'm just not sure what chance they have realistically of winning the scenario at all already, because the British can't take as many casualties as the Americans can and still win the scenario. They have a much lower threshold for casualties, and the Brits are already on my casualty chart here. You can see the total army casualties for the Brits were already pushing 30 strength points, and I think they lose if they get maybe above 45. It's pretty low for the Brits, so not a lot of room left for them to take casualties. So the Americans have taken some casualties. Most of the casualties they've taken were from Maxwell's brigade, which was essentially destroyed, all down to 1 strength point. So the Americans, I think, are at about 25, no, 20. They're at about 20 strength points. So they've got about a 10-point strength point lead on the Brits, and that's not good for the Brits.